meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. Mr. Rogers, please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening.
Tonight we have 4 agenda items, all requiring board action. The first is the Aeronamic construction and renovation update, where the district administration and KCBA will provide an update on the Aeronamic Elementary construction and renovation project. This requires board action. Number 2, the bond issuance, board action. District administration and PFM will provide an update on the market, as well as the next steps, and ask the board to move forward with a max parameters resolution at the May 12th meeting. Number 3 is the district official website, web governance platform, and website accessibility tool contracts, which will require board action. Mr. Bob Helinski and Mr. Rhonda Buford will provide information about the Blackboard contract and an extension for an additional 3 years. Number 4 is the presentation of the 2020-2021 proposed final budget, and again, board action. I will provide an update on the Act 1 timeline, as well as the 2020-2021 proposed general fund budget, and we'll be asking the board to move this forward to approval at the May 12th board meeting.
Mr. Rogers, you can begin with the first agenda item.
So again, the first item up is the Aeronamic construction and renovation update. We have Ryan Orr and Mike Kelly from KCBA joining us, as well as Mr. Frank Salerno from the district, who will be providing the presentation. So Mike and Ryan, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, everyone. Are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Great. We wanted to give a brief presentation tonight of the Aeronamic project, kind of give you some new views that you may not have seen before, and update you on the schedule and process that is coming to an end. We have all of our approvals, all of our recommendations and zoning approvals and things, and one of the things that the board will be looking to do is to move the project ahead to go out to bid next month. And we're going to start with a couple of slides here to give you that update. So go ahead. This is the existing plan. If you want to click to the next one, this will show the proposed site plan. You can see if you keep clicking there, go to the next one, please. You'll start to see where the addition is there in yellow. Go to the next one, please. And where we have the new parking lot to the right off of Bond Avenue in the bus lane. Keep going to the next one, please. The bus loop, the parent drop-off from Bond Avenue all the way to Marvine. Keep going. There you go. Preserved green space. It's a beautiful site. We have quite a lot of green space on the site, and a lot of that is being preserved. Keep going, please. And you can see here the practice fields remain, the one off of Roberts and Marvine. One thing that we did add and want to make sure that we were showing was that the existing playground is to remain right off there off of Marvine Avenue, but we're also adding where the tot lot would be relocated. We hadn't previously shown that there. That's a nice area there that'll be fenced in, secure from outside. Plus, you're always concerned about elementary school kids actually running away out of play areas, so we want to make sure that that's fenced in a little. And it's right up against the building, so they'll have direct access right out of the gym into that tot lot and then back into the school. So we wanted to show that area specifically. So feel free to keep going. Additional trees will be added onto the site. We have a lot of the trees that are going to remain along Vermont Road, and we're adding some additional trees to replace any that would be removed, and making sure that we maintain a really heavy green shade tree presence along Vermont Road. But really, as you can see throughout the property, there's some added along Marvine and some added between the parent loop and the existing fields there. Next slide. A lot of sidewalk improvements as well. I'm not sure we got into that detail with the board last time. We're adding quite a few crosswalks in various areas, as well as some handicap accessible improvements along that existing sidewalk space. So there, all of those ramps and some areas for wheelchair members to pull over a little bit as they're walking along on sidewalks, just to provide better code compliance to that. So there's a lot of upgrades around the sidewalks and crosswalks of the school. Keep going. One of the things that's being considered in partnership with the township is to request to have no parking along Bond Avenue during school hours. So that's something that's being worked out with the township. Go ahead. So these are just a couple of views. This is the existing view from Bond Avenue and Marvine Road. Go ahead to the next one. And you can see the addition there. It's kind of marked by the glass area there between the existing building and the new. So we're using a lot of contextual materials between the new and the old, but actually maintaining historic building practices. You want to oftentimes clearly delineate where a new addition may be from a previous building structure. So that's how we're achieving that in that area. Next slide. And you can see that again a little bit from the lower end from the bus loop area. You can see that zone in the middle there where we have some small group instruction spaces that are articulated a little differently between the addition and the existing school. Next slide. And keep going to the next slide too. And this is going around to the gymnasium side. So this is kind of the exit part of the parent loop, and the tot lot would be just to the left there. Next slide. Another view from across from the practice field. You can see some of the additional trees that were added. And again, back down on Vermont Road from that existing practice field. So while this will be a construction site for a little while, when it's all put back together, the goal is to keep this a very lush and green area around the school. Go ahead. So project phasing, that had changed a little bit in the past, and we wanted to go over what we think is a much cleaner project phasing, essentially with board approval to go out to bid and with hopefully successful bidding. Actually, we just had a very large high school project come in right on budget today. Just opened those bids a few hours ago. So it's and we have some other projects that are similar to this that have been coming on budget or even a little bit under. So in these kind of uncertain times, we are still seeing some good construction numbers, so that's encouraging. If all goes to plan here, we'll be looking to start construction in the summer, in August, and essentially build the new building in 1 year, and then renovate the existing building the previous in the next year. So the idea is that in the September of 2022 is when the K Center would be operating in Aeronamic. And certainly some of the other moves in the district can occur as well. Next slide. So keep going to the next one. This is the existing building. You can see here phase one, the construction area will be in that lower lot, and basically constructing the new addition as well as the bus loop. We'll have a temporary parking lot off of Bond Avenue. What we mean temporary, that'll be created, but have basically just a rough course of asphalt put on top. The finished course would be put on top when it's completed the following summer. So go ahead to the next slide. So you can see here after that construction area is going through for phases 2 through 4. So that's going into the existing building. We still have the existing parking lot there, and the construction laydown space is now behind what's essentially the new addition, which would have been completed by the summer of 21. So go ahead. Then summer work of 2022, this is when we're kind of wrapping everything up. We would put the finish coat on that parking lot area there, the finish coat onto the bus loop, and kind of finish up some of the work that's going on inside the existing new addition and the existing school. Go ahead. You can kind of go through these if you want every 5 seconds or so. This is a view of the main lobby. What you're seeing there is a bit of a digital covering that we can show a variety of different designs there. This is the reception area. You can see a lot of great views right out to where all the visitors will be coming from, so that's a really great upgrade for security. A new library space where some of those existing classrooms are now when you first walk in, the DAO office space with a STEM room beyond. Some of the existing classrooms, or all of the existing classrooms, will be renovated. New sinks, new ADA compliant areas, new lighting, new HVAC in those areas. And then this is a view, the previous one there, of a new classroom in the existing corridor where, go ahead. So that's the new classroom space there. And then the next slide there is an upgrade of the existing classrooms and corridors. You can kind of see the old tile on the wall be cleaned, new ceilings and lights, and we'll be creating some new entrances into each classroom for better handicap accessibility, as well as much more secure entrance into those classroom spaces. So go ahead to the next slide. We do have some areas in the new addition where we have some learning and some educational spaces outside of the classroom as well for one-on-one instruction as well as small group. The gymnasium space, you can kind of see the net there in the middle that's, a third of the way down. We were just trying to show that as its ability to block off half the gym from the other. And, we were saying even if you used half this gym for recess and half the gym for PE class, it still leaps and bounds more than the kind of basement gymnasium space that the students have access to now. So this is really one of the very incredible additions for the school and the community. You can see just some different seating arrangements there. This is for, for a public event or a show. Go ahead. So the steps taken to date, we've met with Upper Darby Council, had a good meeting with them, and they did approve all of our land development, which is essentially all the approvals to start construction. The construction document plans have been developed. We're really on the final couple of weeks of that. We do have a construction budget to share with you tonight. We did get a final construction budget from Dewey Engineering, who was the company we asked to do a third-party estimate. All of the site and building phasing plans are being refined, ready for construction as well. And as we said, we're presenting to you guys tonight the cost estimate and address any questions you may have. So keep going to the next slide. So on to the cost estimate. Next slide. We started at our the D's here are the phases: schematic design, design development, and then construction drawings. So you can kind of see how the project has expanded and contracted in cost over the last year. Schematic design, where we were a little over where we wanted to be. We talked about some of the reductions of some things that we wanted to just kind of value engineer the project a little bit and refine what was included. So that budget was reflected in the DD estimate there, where we brought the project back on budget, which is about $20.8 million there. In the CD budget, we further refined that. We gave the estimators some additional information as well, and we were able to find some other areas that maybe had been overestimated and brought that number down a little bit more. So, like I said, we're kind of trending on budget, or actually in this case a little under budget, with the subtotal of the building at just under $20 million. You can see site work went up a little bit as the building went down. The site work went up. That's a lot of the additional improvements that we were looking at, asked to do by the township, as well as some additional site work that was required there. But even as the building went down and the site went up, our subtotal was still a little less than what we showed last time we met. So that's all good news. So next slide. Some of the reductions that we had talked about previously, we did remove a little bit of the stone from the gym addition. Most of that is still there. There's a little bit of a mix now between stone and limestone panel and metal panel. But a lot of those things were all things that were things that we still felt was going to make a very quality building, and a lot of upgrades to the building, but some things that were maybe a little higher in cost than we wanted them to be, so we looked at taking some things off to help reduce costs. So next slide. Some things that increase the cost, again, as I mentioned, some of the additional ADA sidewalks and ramps. These were some things that the township had asked. Some increased stormwater management. We had to expand the basement mechanical room a little bit to get some more fresh air for code compliance as well. And some of the food service equipment expanded a little bit in scope as well. So it's all, anytime that there are things being added back into a project, it's all good things for the building. But we wanted to make sure we were sharing with you guys what was taken out of the project and some of the things that were added back in. Go ahead, next slide. So again, we're still at an area where the building is now a little under $23 million. We're still holding $1.3 million in contingency, so that's all money that we certainly don't want to use, but we want to have in our back pocket for things we may find in the renovation, things we may find in the site. So those are all things that we want to budget ahead of time for things that we may occur during construction. So we're still holding that, as well as about a $700,000 budget for new furniture, chairs, desks, and things like that for the school. So there's still some more money in there for additional things outside of the building, and that gets us to a total project of $27 million. Next slide. Keep going. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're kind of giving you guys the update tonight. We're looking for, as we've asked, it's not required by the state or anything, but we had set this kind of agreement up as a group when we first started to say, all right, at each phase, we're going to give you an update, we're going to give you a budget update, and we're going to make sure the board is comfortable moving ahead. So we're going to take your questions tonight and look for the board to move ahead to what the next phase would be, which is essentially bidding. You haven't committed to spending money on anything yet. It's just bidding the project on the street. We expect those bids to come back in early June. We would evaluate those bids and bring a project to you guys for approval in July. Now that July 14th meeting would be the meeting where the board would be considering entering into contracts with the builders to begin the project. If so, construction would start in August, as I mentioned, with the goal to be completely done 2 years later. 1 year for the new addition, 1 year for the renovation. So again, we'll turn that over to any questions that you guys may have. Please fire away.
This is Ed Brown. I just have one suggestion for the cost estimate summary slide. The first one, I think you have several entitled that, but the first one, I would just recommend you state what those acronyms stand for: SD, DD, and CD. Just for those who don't know, you don't use them anywhere else in the presentation that I see, so you just may want to spell them out so people know what they stand for. That's all.
No, that's a good suggestion. In fact, we'll actually do that and put the dates when those phases were, month to month. That way, people can see the progression by phase and by timeline. So that's a good suggestion. We'll do that. We'll do that and send this to the district as a PDF for you to post online.
Thank you. Thank you for the detailed information. This is very good. Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. David Neal would like to have a comment.
Thank you, Ms. Buford. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you, KCBA, for the outstanding work you've completed on the Aeronamic project. And I just want to, I really want to make a comment to the public. This Aeronamic project is really a stepping stone to provide equitable opportunities to all of our children in the school district. And although only certain children will be attending this location, it will eventually allow us to bring children that are outside the school district back into our community. And we have to remember that. A lot of community members continue to bring up these costs, and this is something that is not going away. Our school district has to make these improvements to our buildings to make sure we can adequately educate all of the children within our community. Thank you for your time.
Dr. McGarry?
Yes, I apologize. Normally, I'm keeping up with this throughout the whole entire presentation. I just want to remind those viewers who are logging on now that if there's agenda items for the Education and Pupil Services, you still have time if you send an email to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org, committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Please give your name and address and the agenda item under the Education and Pupil Services where you would like to leave a comment or ask a question, and we'll make sure once the board has commented, we open up to public comment, we'll address your comments or your questions. You can also send a voice message, and that will turn into an email for us at 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, committee questions at upperdarby.sd.org or 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Please leave your name, your address, and the agenda item you would like to comment on or leave a question. Thank you.
Are there any other board comments about agenda item number 1, Mrs. Buford?
There are no more requests to comment from the board.
Thank you. Thank you, KCBA, for that informative presentation. Mr. Rogers, agenda item number 2, please.
So the next agenda item is the bond issuance, which is a discussion by district administration, and we have a representative on the line from PFM, who's the district's financial advisor, and I will actually lead the presentation as we walk through this. So tonight we are going to provide an update on the 2020 bond issuance, and this is a very similar presentation to the one at the previous committee meeting. So we're going to move through it a little bit faster because we wanted to provide an update from a market perspective, but there has not been a major change since the last presentation. So you can still see these are similar graphs. This is a 30-year graph that shows here that interest rates are at an all-time low. There was a spike, and you can see this red box here that as you go down is expanded. And you can see the spike was right in mid-March, close to when the closure had been implemented. And it spiked up due to the unknowns within the market. It has dropped back down and leveled out. In recent days, it has been moving at minimal basis points. So it is very steady and still at a 30-year low. Next is the exact same document that was presented at the previous meeting, just showing the district's current outstanding debt. Obviously, there's been no change to this. The only change would be if we issued a bond. And again, this is a breakdown of the current market conditions, which again are very similar, if not exactly the same, to the previous presentation, as well as discussing the next steps. At the previous committee meeting, we had discussed the earliest action by the district was to move the max parameters bond resolution to the April board meeting. We had slowed down that process and waited until now, and this presentation will be asking the board to move that max parameters resolution to the May 12th board meeting. So that's what is being explained here as just breaking down the timeline and what our next steps will be. So again, this is a breakdown of past steps from February, March, April, and moving towards May. And you can see April 28th, tonight, we are presenting an update to the board, and you've noted that the market hasn't changed much as far as the interest rates are concerned. They're still at a 30-year low. The next step would be asking the board to move forward with a adoption of the max parameters resolution at the May 12th board meeting. The max parameters resolution is a resolution that will set a maximum amount that the board can go out to issue the bond. Based on all previous projections and millage requirement studies, we've used this document here to paint the picture of the impact on the district's outstanding debt, as well as the impact to an average taxpayer. So as you can see, and if you follow across the top, each column is numbered. So I'll reference a column by number and so that you can see where I'm speaking of. In column 4, you can see Series 2020, $37,990 million, or $37,990,000, which is what the max parameters would be set at. And what that means, again, is the board would be asking or adopting a max parameters resolution that states we will not go above $37.9 million. So as you move across, and again, we've reviewed this multiple times, the next important column would be column 6. And you can see the second line down. The first one, you'll see 596,000. That was the impact of the 2019-2020 budget. If this bond was issued at the max parameters, 37.9, the immediate impact on next year's budget would be $721,000, which equates to just below 0.7% of a millage increase, which would be an impact to the average taxpayer of $19.22 in next year's taxes. I'd also like to say, again, it's 37.9 is the maximum number. So if, as these costs come in, and you could see in the previous presentation of Aeronamic, the cost being lower than the previous projections, this bond amount will come in lower than the 37.9, and in turn, reduce the budget impact next year and years to come. So at this point, if any board member, and the final slide here has the previous millage study. So this is the final slide. If board members have any questions at this time.
This is Neil Desnoyers. I have a quick question, not about the proposed bond issuance we're going through now, but just in relation to the current interest rates, which are at or near historic lows. And the question is, for our currently outstanding debt, is there any option to refinance it to a lower interest rate? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a good question. If you go back to page number 2 in the bottom right-hand corner, that's your existing debt. So I'll give everyone a second there. And so each series of bonds, is laid out here, and each series of bonds has its own specific, what we call a call date, which is the earliest date when you can come and refinance the bonds. And if you look down, it's kind of almost the last row of that page number 2. It says call date. There's 1 or 2 bond issues that it says make whole, which means that they're not callable for savings. You have 1 bond issue where we're past the call date, which was back in 2017. That one you were able to refinance, but it actually has such low interest rates on it already that it still doesn't save any money to go do it. And then the next couple, you see there's one that's callable at any time, and that one also doesn't currently have any savings. Then you have another issue which is non-callable, and then you have the 2 issues on the right. We're still about 3 or 4 years away from the call dates. So, part of what PFM's job is, in conjunction with RBC, is to monitor all these different bond issues for refinancing opportunities. But right now, you don't have any that produce, any meaningful savings. But that's something that we will keep an eye on.
Okay. This is Mr. Desnoyers again. Thank you very much for that information.
Sure.
We have a comment from Dr. Meredith Haig.
Thank you, Ms. Buford, and thank you, Mr. Rogers, for the presentation. I just want to, while the numbers are in front of us, and if we could scroll back up to the chart that showed this annual impact on the average taxpayer, that we don't take lightly ever, I think, spending the taxpayers' dollars, and we understand that these are very, very difficult times. But I just want to reiterate what small amounts we're talking about here. So in the end, the cumulative impact will be on the average taxpayer $45 per year, and so we have to ask ourselves whether over the course of a year we can spend another $45 so that our kids aren't bused to a township several miles away for $45 per year, right? That's $4 a month. And I just want people to be totally clear on what our priorities are and that we are prioritizing our kids. And I think that's worth doing. And I'm excited that we're going to get such a good deal on this.
And Merritt, if you don't mind, I'd like to just clarify also that when you say $45 cumulative, that's after 3 years of gradual increases in the millage rate in order to cover 3 bonds that have been issued, or 2 that have been issued, and this would be the third. So in the first year it was $15 and then build up. Next year would be $19. The following year would be $10, which would reach to the $45 that you're stating.
Thank you, Mr. Redders, and of course you're correct. And I just was sort of making the worst case scenario is that in the future you'll have $45 as a result of this. You'll have $45 more, or the average taxpayer would have $45 more per year to pay as a result. And as you correctly point out, these two bonds. So I just want to make sure people see the numbers and see that we are not talking about massive increases, and for that money, we're really getting a pretty tremendous project. But thank you so much for the clarifications. That's why we keep you around.
Thank you. I'd also just like to add, because I know that, there's a lot of information in these slides, and which in turn, when you try to get it on one page, can become very small. So for members of the public to be able to view it closely, you can access all of these documents publicly on board docs and reference through these slides under each agenda item. And again, the number that Dr. Haig's referencing is column 14, the farthest to the right, should you reference it at home from board docs.
Rachel Mitchell would like to comment.
Thank you very much for this very thorough presentation. I just wanted to ask PSM, who we had brought on, I think, just over a year ago, to help us, as a district and as a value-added service for our taxpayers, to make sure that we were, getting the best deal as we move through these projects. And this project, this bond issuance, is not just for Aeronamic. It's for various other projects throughout our district: windows, pavement, bathrooms in schools. So I just wanted to ask Zach from PSM, how you're feeling as a financial advisor. I know it's very uncertain times, but getting money almost for nothing seems like a pretty good deal to me. And I wish I could get those kind of interest rates. So I just wanted to get your opinion right now as far as what you're feeling like as far as the amount of debt that the district has and the opportunity that we have here to get this money at historic lows.
Yeah, well, so as far as the bond market goes, I mean, it is at or near all-time lows. So the money is cheap. We priced a bond issue today for a school district in Schuylkill County. It was a longer bond issue, and the interest rate was, well below 3% for the all-in fixed rate. So, I mean, things from that standpoint are in good shape as far as the interest rates go. The district's debt, when you go back to that page number 2, okay, that shows all of your existing debt, from a budget standpoint and, from a school district standpoint, what we look to is we look to the rating agencies, because that's who ultimately kind of, makes an opinion on, does the district have too much debt, and they view you as not having a lot of debt. I mean, if you look in the gray bar towards the bottom of the page, it shows you have about $28 million of debt outstanding as a district, and the debt pays off within 10 years, your current debt. That's a very rapid amortization. Most school districts, in your area and around the state have debt that runs out 20 plus years, would probably be the average. Your debt goes out 10 years. So, I mean, it does create an opportunity for you that when you're doing these borrowings, that you can wrap the new debt around your existing debt and have a lower budgetary impact. And that's how we've been structuring these. So between rates being low and your debt profile being short and small, I mean, you do have a nice opportunity to get out into the market and, hit a home run on the borrowing rate in the current environment.
Thank you so much, Zach.
No problem.
I have a question. Question. On the impact slide, if you can go back to that, the impact on taxpayers that Dr. Haig was alluding to earlier, where it had $75,000. I can't see the top of the column, but my question was about the, typically, don't they use $100,000 as the benchmark? Is there a reason we chose $75,000 as opposed to $100,000?
So throughout all these presentations, and what RBC put this together a couple years ago when we started going down the path of putting in a infrastructure improvement, and it has been set at $75,000, which is the average assessment in Upper Darby, or for the school district's tax base. It is at 75. We have, in budget presentations and other places, shown increments of $25,000 or $50,000 assessments so that each individual viewer of the presentation could kind of figure out where they are. Maybe it hits exactly on their assessment or close enough, maybe in between two categories that they could see it. But the millage study requirement's been done under the premise of $75,000 for the median assessment.
Thank you for making that clear. Thank you.
I just want to say a couple points to this, and I appreciate PFM being on the call. They're kind of our backbone of checking this, another resource checking it, as well as RBC. They're involved. But also on the architectural side, we have KCBA and we have Dewey providing a service checking the actual costs. So while we have an architect that's involved, we also have Dewey, who is out there checking on the actual cost of the construction cost versus what the architectural cost would be to see how much they're matching up. And later on in the presentation, as we get into the budgetary part of the district's budget for next year, we are not looking to exceed our adjusted index or go out to the maximum. I know that there has been comments or questions that the school district is looking to go out to the maximum that they can tax. In fact, we're coming in below the index. We are not taxing at the highest rate in order to fund this project, the capital improvements, or the budget. We're coming in under what we anticipated at 3.5% in November and December, and below the index that we were talking about earlier in this year. I just want to make sure that that's based on what our budget would be. I know there's been comments saying we're taxing our residents to the maximum extent that we possibly can. We're coming in below that tax rate.
Ms. Buford, are there any other comments or questions from the board?
There are no more comments or questions from the board on this agenda item.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Mr. Rogers, you can proceed to agenda item number 3.
Agenda item number 3, again, is the district official website, web governance platform, and a website accessibility tool contract. And I'm going to invite Mr. Bob Helinski and Ms. Rhonda Buford to present on this contract.
Okay, thank you for letting me present tonight. Rhonda's there taking all the comments from everybody. Can we just go to the third slide of this where it has the actual pricing contract? So this is our contract for our Blackboard renewal. Our Blackboard encompasses a number of different products for us. So it's all bundled together in this pricing comparison here. So we have a couple items. The first one is the Blackboard Web Community Manager, and that's for our website, for all web pages, our teacher pages, etc. And then we have the mass notification, which is our parent link system for all the emails and phone calls we've been putting out to the community. And the other one down there is the mobile communications app and maintenance. And that's for users, our children, our families to go online so they can look at their grades and look at their attendance. And that's in the App Store currently right now. And then the last one down there is the Blackboard Premium, which we build in every year is for some maintenance and some training that they come on site for us. So for Ms. Buford and her staff to be able to teach the teachers. And the one thing on there is Moncito that we currently have. Moncito helps us stay American Disabilities Act compliant, and that's what we currently use. We're looking to move forward to a new product that Blackboard has. It's called Blackboard Alley. So the Moncito will just scan our website and check for some broken links, tell us what's wrong, and then we have to go in there and make changes to it. The Blackboard Alley has a lot more items in it that is very helpful for us to keep us compliant for the ADA. One of the things I really like about that is the alternative formats that for any embedded links or files on our website can now be translated into 84 different languages. It can be accessed by a Braille reader for people with sight conditions. It can be set up for a Beeline reader. It also goes OCR to PDF format, which is a very nice thing that we don't have right now to help our community out there. So Blackboard has given us two different proposals, one for a 1 year fixed cost for $58,270. But if we stay with that one and only go 1 year, if we renew it year after year, it'd be a cost of living index increase. So we're proposing tonight to go with the 3 year option, which will give us a fixed cost at the $58,270 and stay consistent with what we want to do here. It's all based on our 12,000 students. They have a bundled package that ranges from 10,000 to 16,000 students. And when we did this, we told we had about 12,000 students, so they kept that consistent from our previous contract. Blackboard's been good to us. It's been doing everything we need to do, making changes over the last couple of years, and making things happen. So we want to put this in front of the board for approval for the next board meeting. So at that point, Rhonda, if there's anything you wanted to add to it or any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
No, thank you, Bob. That was covered, I think, very comprehensively. Thank you very much.
Mr. Helinski, I just have a question. If we do lock into a 3 year contract with Blackboard and Ally, what about the possibility of them coming out with new modules and new pieces? As you know, with technology, they improve their product, they improve their offering. So how would that position us if we locked in with 3 years to them if they came out with something new and something more comprehensive that we would be interested in that meets our needs? How would that work?
Well, these are our maintenance contracts for 3 year, ongoing 3 year. So any changes come out that they improve on their software will be included on that. We already have a custom website on that. We're paying the maintenance on that. So anything that they come out with will be integrated into that custom format that we already have. But that's what this cost really is doing for support and any new features that they come out. Like I said, it's ADA compliant. It's the web content accessibility guidance 2.1, which is the newest level from the federal government. The other vendors only are at 2.0, and I know Blackboard is staying up to date on everything that they need to do. And over the last 3 years, I think they've served us well.
Thank you for that answer. If there's no more comments or questions from the board,
There are none.
Mr. Rogers, please proceed with the fourth agenda item. But I have a statement I want to read. Are we going to do the budget one now? I have a statement I'd like to read that will provide some context for some of the things you're about to hear. Consideration of a zero tax increase. The Upper Darby School District is underfunded by over $14 million a year. The announcement and/or consideration of a zero tax increase is reminiscent of past school budgets where the community, students, and their families, teachers, administrators, and political leaders filled the Performing Arts Center demanding the preservation of programs. For years, the Upper Darby School District has done more with less. What has happened as a result of doing more with less? Our elementary program does not have the same level of academic support as it did in 2008. Our elementary schools and middle schools are overcrowded with students attending classes in modular classrooms and in schools not owned by the district and not within district boundaries. 3, our facilities are in need of upgrades and improvements. What have we done about it? Number 1, we've written grants for new elementary and middle school curriculum and materials for $3.5 million. 2, we have written grants for safety and security for close to $2.3 million. Number 3, we have recently written a grant for equity, and we were awarded $491,000, which will be used for technology. This equates to approximately $6.2 million. We've also completed a comprehensive review of our facilities and financial plan to improve them. We've also created an equity team to ensure that students in all of the communities get what they need to overcome barriers to achieving their goals. A decision to increase taxes or not to increase taxes has been and will always be the burden of a school board. We know the history of this community and the pain and suffering that has occurred and is happening now. The bottom line is that schools serve as one of the most important resources in this country, now more so than ever before. If the financial environment does not recover, our public schools will be seen as the only source of education for many. A zero tax increase would require the board to consider the Pennsylvania School Code. We do not want to cut programs, but this is what the school code allows. A, 5 reasons to suspend or furlough: substantial decrease in enrollment, curtailment or alteration of educational programs recommended by the superintendent and concurrence by the school board. 3, consolidation of schools in the same district through a merger or joint board agreement where new school districts are established. 4, economic reasons that require a reduction in professional employees. B, economic suspensions requiring a board resolution 60 days prior to passage of the district's final budget. And C, all suspensions require the use of the process identified in 1125.1. Mr. Rogers, that completes my statement. Please proceed with your fourth agenda item.
Thank you. So our fourth agenda item is the presentation of the 2020-2021 proposed final budget in compliance with the Act 1 timeline. So first, I'd like to just highlight the budget process so far this year and the Act 1 timeline in general. On November 26th, we presented to the board at a committee meeting the idea of a preliminary budget versus an accelerated opt-out. The two differences here are preliminary budget, where you would go through a different process of presenting a preliminary budget, and if you go through that process, you're able to increase taxes using referendum above the adjusted index. The accelerated opt-out holds the board to the adjusted index. After that meeting, we presented a resolution to the board on December 3rd of 2019, and the board approved the resolution for the accelerated opt-out, which meant the district would not exceed the 3.8% tax increase for the adjusted index in the 2020-21 fiscal year. So now we move forward to the next steps of the process. In the Act 1 process, when you adopt an opt-out resolution, your next step is a proposed final budget. The proposed final budget has to be adopted by the board 30 days prior to the approval of the final budget. 20 days prior to that, you have to make that proposed final budget available for the public inspection, and 10 days prior to the approval of the final budget, you would provide notice of the intent to adopt the final budget. So although I referenced 30, 20, and 10 days, those are the key indicators in the Act 1 budget timeline. Most districts use that and adopted that timeline to their actual board meeting schedule. So you'll see second from the bottom, the June 16th date, proposing that our board will adopt the final budget on June 16th. That's a regularly scheduled committee meeting that would be turned into, or following the regularly scheduled committee meeting, we would have a special voting meeting for the budget. So all of these other dates, the May 12th, the May 26th, and the June 3rd, fall within those days, 30, 20, and 10. May 12th being the adoption of a proposed final budget. The key here is Act 1 requires us to follow these guidelines. We have to meet those days, 30, 20, and 10. The farthest you can go out is June 30th, which you can see down at the bottom of the screen here, and approve the budget no later than June 30th. What's most important is to know that we're following Act 1. When we approve or ask the board to approve a proposed final budget in May, 30 days prior, at least 30 days prior to a final adoption of a final budget, there are many, many things that we do not know. So between now and the final approval at June 16th, I can guarantee that the proposed final budget is different than what what the final budget will be at June 16th. So I want the board members and the members of the public, as we go through this presentation, there are many unknowns, and we're going to get into those specific unknowns, but understand that this budget is not the final budget. And the final budget will most likely look very different than this budget. So next up, we're going to discuss the budget considerations pre-mandate school closure, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. McGarry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, for reviewing those dates and those timelines. And I just want to piggyback off on the comment that there's obviously time. This is the preliminary final that we're adopting, and there's timelines that we have to hit. I know there are comments that come in from the public or emails that we get over a period of time about what we're up against. School districts are always up against approving a budget. Oftentimes, school districts approve a budget with a lot of uncertainty. What is the uncertainty? We don't know what we're getting in state revenue. We don't know what we're getting in federal revenue. So in November and December, as we were asking the board whether they wanted to go with the preliminary or the opt-out, meaning that we did not want to exceed the adjusted index, and this board, understanding that the community financially could not afford to go out with that 3.8% tax increase, came back to the administration and said, you've got to do more work. At that time, we were considering the following prior to school closures. We were going to convert assistant principals at our large elementary schools, our lead teachers, into assistant principals. We were going to add 6 reading specialists to the elementary school level. We were going to increase our guidance counselors by 5 at the elementary school level. This is the first time that the school district this past year has had elementary school guidance counselors. We were going to add 5 more guidance counselors to the elementary school level. We were going to increase and add a network technician, much to a comment that came in earlier about the cost of online learning. Bob Helinski, who spoke earlier, and the technicians in the school district have been outstanding in servicing computers, working with the public and giving out computers, but we're running a very small networking technician group of computers, folks working on computers, and Mr. Helinski, who's our director of technology. It's not a large team trying to service all this, so we were trying to add support there. And obviously, with all the communication that we have, we were going to add some support to the media services office. Those were an additional $1.6 million to this budget. And at that point, we were looking at a 3.5% increase prior to COVID-19, which is still below the adjusted index of 3.8%.
So in line with Dan discussing the Act 1 index and the base index, you can see here a chart that we actually presented on November 26th during the committee presentation discussing whether to go with a preliminary budget or an accelerated opt-out. And this is the exact same slide from that presentation, and we just wanted to show the board and the public once again a historical trend of where the district, where the base index was, the adjusted index, and what Upper Darby actually increased taxes. So as you work left to right from the school year 2014-15, you can go all the way over to 19-20 and also 2021 with a to-be-determined tax increase, which would be presented during the final budget. You can see in most cases that we were, or in all cases, we were below the adjusted index, and in most cases, in many, we came in below the base index. And I'd also like to point out, you can see in the 2016-17 school year, we had actually had a 0% tax increase. So next, in conjunction with that, we wanted to also build on the presentation of the actual index and what the budget increase was. And you can see here, this is a representation of historical budget use of fund balance. This is not actual, this is what was budgeted. How did the budget work out for the district? And again, it's the same years, 2014-15 through our proposed budget for tonight. And you can see after the first 2 columns, school year 14-15, 15-16, there was a budgeted use of fund balance of $2.5 million to balance the district's budget. In 16-17, that jumped to $6.5 million, which is also in conjunction with the previous slide when we had a 0% tax increase. So in each year since then, or from 16-17 to 17-18, it went up slightly, the $7 million used of fund balance. In 18-19, it went down a little bit to 6.8, and in 19-20, it went down a little bit more to 6.2. And in the proposed budget, we're at 5.3. What this really presents is you could see a steady budgeting of $2.5 million of fund balance. Now, we know as a district we've had historical turnover. We always have fill rates that are a little bit lower. So there's always a gap. We budget 100% of staffing, and it's very, very hard to reach 100% of staffing. So it had always been built in at that $2.5 million range for salaries and benefits to show 100% staffing. If we did not lose one member of the staff, no teachers, everyone stayed all year, you would have realized those budget numbers. But when you went to when the district went to a 0%, you could see how it jumped by $4 million. And then it increased again in the following year. Since then, we've been trying to increase taxes, tighten our budgeting processes in order to close that gap. So that's when, from 2017-18 to present, we have slowly dwindled away at what we're budgeting to use in the fund balance. And there's different practices that we've used to do so. But we just wanted to point that out in conjunction with the Act 1 index slide.
And Craig, I think it's also important to note that the slide that you referred to in November of this past year, those Upper Darby School District numbers, I know there's comments and questions that come in that we're the highest taxing school district, not only in the county, but in the state. And my records show that Upper Darby School District historically has been among the lower in increasing its taxes over the last several years. Is that correct?
That is correct. And for reference, in the same presentation from November 26, I believe there's also a graph there that shows the Upper Darby in comparison to our neighboring districts in the county.
Right, and we'll make sure that we make that public again, that the Upper Darby School District tax increase to local taxpayers has been below the adjusted index and oftentimes below the base index and lower than most surrounding county school districts, while we're still underfunded by close to $16 million a year. Compliments to you, boards, school district for balancing the budget while taking into consideration the costs, especially in this uncertain times. In this budget as well, Craig, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it's important, my understanding and working with you through this is that the 2.6, while is the base index, it also takes into account maintaining our current teaching workforce and their salaries, as well as teacher contracts and contracts that we're obligated to at the 2.6%. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So moving along to the slides, the next couple of slides, I just wanted to point out, if you can, Harry, if you don't mind, budget assumptions as of 4/28, and we'll go through. I'm trying to also work in some of the questions we've had and some of the comments that do come in to address them as we go through this presentation. As of 4/28 today, here's what we're dealing with, as we talked about in the Education and Pupil Services meeting. We want to be optimistic that we're going to open schools on time in August and not be in a virtual setting. Right now, I cannot guarantee that's going to happen. So that's why we need that time to plan for all these options. Based on opening schools in August, we still have to consider that if that does change in July or August, we still have to make sure that we have transportation, busing, cafeteria workers, crossing guards, everything up and running at a moment's notice if we're supposed to turn back on into a live in-person instruction, and we need a budget thinking that way. If we're in the same situation going into the fall and in the next school year, my recommendation to the board would be, if we're still dealing with COVID-19, we are going to have to look at a completely different way of budgeting and consider furloughs and consider staffing reductions, because we might not need all those employees in a virtual setting if we're still operating in a virtual setting moving forward. That is not our recommendation at this time, because there's uncertainty whether or not we're going to be in person or not. So as of 4/28 this evening, and obviously more information will come out, we have time to make those adjustments, that we're maintaining our staffing for the 1920 school year, meaning teachers, professional staff. There may be a situation where some hourly employees may be furloughed, but we may bring them back depending on how long we are in a virtual setting. Level state funding and federal funding based on the 1920 funding. What did we know prior to COVID-19? Here's what we thought we were going to get. Prior to COVID-19, we were going to get an increase in $1.2 million in our basic education funding from the state. Still underfunded by millions of dollars, but there was going to be a slight increase. Prior to COVID-19, there was going to be an increase of $270,000 in special education funding from the state, not the feds at this point in time. The feds are still way behind in the promises of funding special education. State funding could decrease. However, what we've been told at this time is that we should anticipate no less than the 3-year average. So we've taken into consideration the no less than 3-year average, what we anticipate in federal revenues for Title III, Title II, and other mechanisms as we are building this budget. We are taking that into consideration, as well as obligations and contracts. The 2.6% also includes a 2020 bond issuance and capital projects, such as new windows, new paving in Highland Park, the capital projects we've been outlining and promising the public, not just to do something to expand Aeronamic and renovate it, but also to improve existing facilities at that $5 million bond issuance a year that we've promised. This is all included in the 2.6% tax increase, not the 3.5. We're under that. What is not in this budget at this time? We are hearing that there could be CARES Act funding. At this time, however, we are not sure how much of the CARES Act funding we have to give out to local non-public schools. We're still waiting for guidance on the CARES Act funding as it relates to this budget. If the CARES Act funding does come in, Mr. Rogers and I have talked about using that money to offset our technology and lease to purchase. What would that do? That would allow us to then also decrease our deficit of a bond issuance or lease to purchase deficit. So we would take that money, if it comes in the CARES money, use that for technology and offset lease to purchase, would then make us even in a better position in our future debt services. This is another question that we received, and I appreciate, while at times I know that there's definitely concern, I want the public that's there and obviously the board that we are taking all these things in consideration. And what would happen if we had a 0% tax increase? The type of instructional delivery we don't know at this time. That's true. We have no idea whether we're going to be virtual, online only, or flexible instruction. There are students that are doing well in an online setting, but by and large, it has not been the best optimal learning environment for the majority of our kids or our families, and that's not just here in Upper Darby, that's across the county. It's had a significant impact, and there are gaps. All the research that's out there, all the documents that are out there are saying, from universities all the way through, there will be gaps in learning as a result of COVID-19, and that will also add to our budget, meaning right now there are students that might be in need of special education, evaluations, and we might see an increase in evaluations. That will increase our psychological services and our evaluations. That will be expensive if that happens as a result of deficits in student learning. With that said, if there is a 0% tax increase, which is being considered at state level, if the Board of Upper Darby School District is forced into a 0% tax increase, what would that mean? It would mean that we would have to consider program curtailment, alteration or changing programs in the school district, which we will not go into tonight, but we will certainly discuss that at future meetings if that's necessary. I do not want to cause fear and panic because that is not how we're thinking about this right now. We would, however, have to reduce and forgo capital projects. What else does that mean? That means the Aeronamic project would have to be delayed. It would have to be considered to be delayed at a 0% tax increase by this board, given your inability to generate that cost of up close to the $700,000 or the $15, $19, and $45 that we were looking at if a 0% tax increase would happen. That does not mean we give up on the Aeronamic project, but it would have to be delayed. We would consider hiring freezes. We would replace necessary staff, but if we can make do with certain class sizes, we would have to have a hiring freeze in order to make sure that we stay at that 0% tax increase. We reduce hourly employees. We reduce our capital reserve transfer. We'd also have to reduce our bond rating. I know that question has been asked, and we'll get to that later on this evening, but we have to consider the fact that a 0% tax increase and using either more of our fund balance or cutting staff would result in a reduced bond rating and make it difficult to borrow money later on down the line for any kind of projects, as well as concerns in paying off some of our debt service and our commitments to teacher salaries and contracts. And a final reminder, that regardless of all these unknowns, this is what's always been the pressure in Upper Darby School District, always. Anybody who's been a board member, and the public knows this, who've been out, unfortunately, over the years dealing with the most pain and suffering of a lot of school districts around the Commonwealth, you've got to adopt a budget by June 30th, not knowing answers to all these questions. And as a result of that, sometimes it's like throwing a dart blind at a dartboard.
So at this point, we're going to really dive into the numbers of the actual budget now that Dan and I have broken down how we got here. I'll do my best not to bore you too far with all these numbers. I'm sure Dr. Haig's going to be intrigued. We'll proceed forward with the presentation, and hopefully some of the comments will be answered as we go, and if not, we'll follow up at the end. So right here, this slide here shows the current school year, 1920 final budget, and the proposed 2020 and 2021 budget. The one thing to note is in the 1920 budget, we discounted both revenues and expenditures for two things. The first line of revenues of the $204 million was discounted in 1920. We removed the tax increase because it gets added in a few rows down. And we also removed the $2.25 million Safe Schools grant so that we're showing apples to apples. The 2020-2021 bond does not have the additional $2.2 million of a Safe Schools grant. In the expenditures, we did the same as far as removing the Safe Schools grant. And that's going to be a common thread as we go through the presentation so that I can show comparative numbers to the board. So when you look, as you work down the third row, it shows expenditures exceeding revenues. That's expenditures exceeding revenues before a tax increase. In 1920, it would have been an $8.1, almost $8.2 million amount of the expenditures exceeding revenues. In the proposed budget for tonight, it's $7.3 million. You then add in the increase for a tax increase in 1920 of 1.9, which produced $1.9 million. In the current year, we're proposing a 2.6% tax increase, which also produces $1.9 million. It's slightly higher by just over $50,000. And that may not make sense when you look at it from this perspective. 1.9 last year equaled 1.9 million, and this year still only equals $1.9 million. The reason for that is assessments. As the assessments go down, the millage rate stays the same. So in the current year, we've experienced a decrease in assessment for some larger properties going through appeals of their assessments, which in turn lessen the value of the millage per assessment. So the assessment goes down, you multiply it out by the millage rate, and you come up with your tax base. So in essence, it's not exactly comparing apples to apples when you look at the assessments. But I wanted to point that out because it sticks out somewhat. So the reason for that would be the reduced assessments, projected assessments in 2020, 2021. All that being said, in order to balance our budget for the 1920 school year, we committed $6.2 million of fund balance, and this proposed budget for 2020, 2021 is suggesting a commitment of $5.37 million to balance the budget. So what does that mean for a taxpayer? And just like we presented the impact of an increase for the bond issuance, this is a projected increase for a taxpayer based on percentage increases. So this graph can show you a tax increase anywhere from 0% to a 3.8%, 3.8 being the adjusted index. We, again, are proposing a 2.6, which is highlighted in the gold rectangle, and you can see going across assessments in $25,000 increments and the impact to a taxpayer. And you can see above the header, these are based on current assessments. And what do I mean by that? Everyone's well aware that we have a countywide reassessment coming. Those new assessments that all of our residents, our board members, and most viewers have received, those assessments are for the 2021-2022 budget and tax year. So this budget here, 2020-2021, is off of your existing assessments as they stand on the county's site and the rate you would have been taxed at in the prior school years. So again, you'll see at a 2.6, at $50,000 assessment, it's $49, $74 for a $75,000 assessment, all the way up for a $300,000 assessment, $295. And that is an annual increase, not monthly. That is what the actual impact would be to your full tax bill from the school district. So now we'll dive in a little bit to the revenue summary. And once we get into these slides with these graphs here, or pie charts, I'm not going to actually reference the dollar amounts because they all feed back to what we just previously referenced. So I'm going to point out in our revenue summary, we're looking at local sources, state sources, federal sources, and other sources. You can see that our budgets, and this is historical, it's relatively consistent, 54% of our revenue comes from local sources. 41% comes from the state, 4% comes from the federal government, and 1% from other. And in those, and we'll dive deeper into what is included in the local, state, federal, and other resources. What you can see here is we're budgeting $210 million for revenue. And in comparison to the prior year, it was 206. And that again is net of the Safe Schools grant. And this is a 1.7% increase. The majority of the increase is coming from Social Security reimbursement, PSERS reimbursement, and the local tax increase. So this slide here is just to point out, as I said on the last one, 54%, more than half of our budget comes from local sources. Of that 54%, 47% is actually your current year taxes. The remaining 6% is other local taxes, anything from transfer tax, delinquent taxes from prior year taxing. But 47% of the district budget is built on the current year issuance of taxes. So breaking down the local resources, or sources, you can see that we break down here taxes, delinquent taxes, earnings on investments, revenues from district activities, revenues from intermediate sources, pass-through funds, and other local sources. So again, this builds out the local revenue at $112 million. And that first line is all the majority of taxes. We just want to indicate, as I referenced before at the bottom, you can see the 1.6% increase over the prior year local revenue. The 1.6 is really coming from an increase from the local taxes, and we also have a decrease in interest earnings because we project out, due to the interest rates and where we are, earning much less than we have in previous budgets in recent years. Now the state source, again at the bottom you're going to see the 1.9% increase, which sounds interesting when we talk about all these different factors that are being considered in the budget assumptions. So as Dr. McGarry referenced, those first two lines are your basic ed and your special ed funding. Those numbers are in line with the 1920 budget. Dr. McGarry referenced that it could go as low as a 3-year average, or if we are lucky enough, maybe the proposed amount. So you're talking about a swing of what's presented here of $48.9 million. The 3-year average would be $46 million, or the proposed budget, as Dr. McGarry, or the proposed basic ed and special ed funding from the state would have been an increase to $50.5 million. All the other items are rather stable in the sense that we look at transportation subsidy on the third line, non-educational programs, and homestead reduction for taxes. Those numbers have been stable, and if they were to go to the 3-year average, they would still be stable at the rate that we're budgeting, or very near close. The one other increase, the increase here in state funding was under Social Security and PSERS, the last line, the $25 million. That's a calculation based off of salaries. So what happens is the district has to pay our share of Social Security for each employee, as well as our share for retirement, PSERS. The state pushes back a calculated refund essentially to us, and they pay a portion back. So that went up in conjunction with the increase of expense. So I'm just going to back up again. And I know that it's tough to see that we're operating under COVID-19 and we're projecting an increase in revenue from state funding. The majority of that increase is coming from Social Security's and PSERS reimbursement to the state, which is in conjunction, again, with the expenses associated with our employees. So it's not that it's actual revenue. When you match that to what we're paying for employees' Social Security and PSERS, depending on the hire date of the employee, the state reimburses anywhere from 50 to 68% of what the district is paying. So we're still incurring cost above and beyond what's being reimbursed here. The big item would be, and because of all of the unknowns, this is an area where the budget could definitely be adjusted, depending on any kind of information we get from the state. They are not sure where their budget's at. And unlike districts who are required to pass a budget by June 30th, and we usually try to pass it before so that we can prepare our taxpayers for tax bills to be out on time, we are in a waiting pattern to find out what the state is going to do from a budget perspective. So we do want the board and the public to know that the $48 million of basic ed and special ed funding could go down. And I'd also I'm going to go back to the previous slide as well, just on local sources. And this is another example of unknowns. Prior to this meeting, we had received information that was not available up until, late this morning from PASBO, the Professional Education or Agency for School Business Officials, who gave out assumptions on their local revenue and how it could be impacted if the state goes to a 0%. Our collection rate's going to go down, different reductions in transfer tax, delinquent tax, and they sent out a projection statewide, not specific to Upper Darby in the sense of different economic advantages or disadvantages of our school district versus other school districts. But those assumptions at a worst case scenario, in my opinion, could be anywhere from $5 to $6 million of a reduction in our local revenue. And the key item in that projection would be a 0% tax increase and a potential of decrease in collection rates, in turn meaning delinquent taxes would increase. Now, when that happens, that would be, I hesitate to say positive for the future, but from a dollar perspective, that would increase your delinquencies in following years. Because once you issue the tax bill, it will come due at some point, whether it be discount, flat amount, penalty, or if in an unfortunate situation it's delinquent, it's paid in future years.
I know there's been questions and comments about our late fee and waiving late fees. Can you just talk about our timeline for tax collection?
So there are many districts that are discussing, and throughout the state, any kind of adjustment to the tax window, and extending the final payment to January 31st. Because many taxing agencies only allow payment through December 31st. Upper Darby already accepts payment to January 31st, and it's the latest that we could accept payment due to the fact that all delinquencies and tax filings have to be closed for that year and submitted to the county no later than February 28th. So what's that mean? From January 31st till the end of February, the business office and tax office has to close out, reconcile, and make sure we're turning over the proper delinquencies to the county. So where some school districts are extending the deadline from December 31st to January 31st, we already have that built into our tax window. There's been discussion about extending discount windows, eliminating penalty windows, or extending the face window, or decreasing the actual penalty. There's a 10% penalty on anything beyond the face period. So those are things that boards across the state are considering. As far as the final date due for a tax payment, I think the district's in a very good situation. We accept discounts up through August 31st. The penalty through October, or the flat up through October, and then it turns into the penalty phase. The biggest struggle there is when you remove, reduce, or change the penalty phase, you're talking about real dollars. If we're looking at a 0% tax increase, if the state mandates that, a lower collection rate, what's built into the budget each and every year, and it's very, very consistent, is penalty payments at just about a $300,000 increase, right? So the 10% above the flat amount gets adjusted up. Any of those changes would be direct impacts to the budget. And that would be something for the board to consider whether or not they would like to explore options of flexing payments. I will also say that my team has been, and this is a little premature, as usual when Dr. McGarry puts me on the spot. We've been looking into electronic payments, so credit card payment, ACH payment. Currently, we only really accept checks through our lockbox or money orders potentially on site in certain circumstances. But payments are funneled through our bank, and they have to be sent directly to the bank through money orders. We're exploring the idea of an electronic payment system where a taxpayer could pay their taxes with a credit card or ACH directly through their bank account. So we're looking at softwares that would allow that, how the fee structure works, and full disclosure, for those types of fee structures in other districts that implement things like that, the fee structure is passed along to the taxpayer. So there's no gain on the district side. It's net neutral from a revenue perspective, but it provides a taxpayer multiple other options. And maybe if you're in a situation where you don't have a mortgage and you're paying your tax bill by check each year and you're just short, maybe you only need a month and a credit card payment would be enough to be able to get you by so that you're not in that delinquency phase. But that's something that we had been considering in years past, and we're really pushing forward with it this year. I would hope to have something by the May committee meeting to discuss those options. So now we'll jump back into the budget conversation, and now we're at federal revenue and other revenue sources. Federal, just as state, we really started looking at level funding, meaning taking the 2019-2020 budget and try and keep it as neutral as possible. There were slight increases that were factored in as far as Title I, Title II, and Title III in this first line, not because we expect the funding to increase from the federal government, but because of the way we're operating, there's a certain amount of carryover from one year to the next. So we're projecting out a slightly higher carryover, and we'll use that to smooth out the federal resources sources for the 2020-2021 budget. And you can see it's a very, very slight increase, 99,000, which is a 1.2% increase over the prior year. In the other sources, again, we kept that level funded, and you'll actually see 0%, it's dead on. The $2.2 million is in association with what Dr. McGarry was referencing about the CARES Act. Each year we budget $2.2 million, or 225, in revenue and also expense. It's a 1-for-1. So it's a zero impact on the budget, bottom line. What that means is we purchase buses each year and also technology. We then issue those out to financing companies, and they finance it back and issue a check back to us to cover the costs. We then have to pay that off with interest over the next 5 years. So, and the other piece here is the Interfund Transfers. That's actually specifically a transfer from the food service, $1.1 million. There's certain operating expenses that are not direct operating expenses to food service. We pay for them out of the district's general fund budget. Each year we go back, we calculate what were those costs. So how much time did I spend as a CFO working on food service? Wendy Elgard as the food service director, and different pieces like that. So cost to equipment, trucks, gas, and we bill it back essentially. So the general fund then bills food service then transfers the money over to the general fund to help offset those costs in the budget. And back to the lease purchase again, and Dan's point. If we get what's projected in the CARES Act money, which is not included here, you can see it's not in the federal, it's not in the state. If we get that money, it'll be one-time money, which is the reason why it's not in this budget right now. We don't have enough clarity and guidance to say that we're going to use that money, let's say, for staff or have a full-blown plan. Our idea is, and we do expect to get the money, we'll use it to offset things like this lease purchase, direct expense, which is in the technology budget. So that's twofold. And Dan scratched the surface with it, but just in a little bit more of a detail. When you say when I say we're gonna offset lease purchase, that's not a direct impact on the current year budget because you don't pick up the cost of it until the next 5 years, right? We take out essentially a loan if you're thinking about it from a personal perspective. What I'm saying is let's not take that loan out. Let's not go out for the lease purchase for the technology. We now have money that we can supplement in the CARES money to cover that technology, still move our 5-year technology plan forward, as well as, if there's enough there, cut direct expense in the technology budget, which would be a direct impact on this year's budget. Now, the beauty of that is one-time money we can then transfer into flattening out over 5 years by using the lease purchase. So instead of being concerned about the next year's budget and saying, oh, wow, the budget, that money's gone. Now we got to make up a $3.8 million gap that we've ripped out of the budget in the prior year. We'd be able to flatten it out because we use that lease purchase idea. And these are also examples of things that will be factored into the final budget. So we are well aware of them and already formulating plans, but there's not enough information there to be able to have confidence in putting it into our preliminary proposed budget at this time. So now we'll move into the expenditures. And again, I'll point out anything that's, very obvious aside from these charts on the right-hand side. So you can see in our expenditures, just like our revenues budgeted majority by local share, the majority of our budget is instructional costs and support services, which goes perfectly in line with being an education entity. Obviously, the majority of our costs is going to be educating students. So you can see here, 67% is instruction, 27% is support service, non-instructional 2%, 4% on our debt service, and then the others are so low they come up as 0%, which are the prior year expenses, capital reserve transfer, and contingency. Specifically, the capital reserve is 0%. In prior years, we have been building in roughly a 0.5% tax increase, which equated to about a $500,000 transfer to the capital reserve. Over the past 2 years, we've been able to transfer more than the $500,000 into capital reserve, and specifically in the prior year, enough to feel comfortable that we can remove the $500,000 transfer in the current year due to the prior year transfer. So that was a $500,000 reduction in expense that we had in this proposed budget. So this is just a different way of looking at it. Instead of looking from the perspective of instructional, support services, non-instructional infrastructure, you can look at it from a different category, the accounts. So we look at the 100s and 200s, which are salaries and benefits, purchase services, supplies, and others. And again, you can see that as this being compared to the prior year it's a $2.5 million increase or a 1.2% increase. And that, again, just like revenue, is projected out excluding the Safe Schools grant. And this shows that salary and benefits are 71% of our entire budget, which again is in line with all of our previous years and also speaks to what really drives our budget. If salary and benefits drive our budget, what drives salary and benefits? And the key factor in the salary and benefits is obviously the staffing, and then beyond that, the union contracts and staffing agreements that dictate how much those salaries increase, how much the benefits will increase, contributions to the benefits, and all of those are considered and built into these numbers here. A further breakdown on the salary and benefits, you can see a 1.7% increase, which in my opinion seems a little bit lower than what I would have expected. What really happened here is you had the increase for the 100s, the actual salaries, and then our health benefits. Our rates went up 3.7%, but based on different budgeting strategies and a deep dive into how we were budgeting our benefits, we were able to streamline it and get us down to a 1.7% increase overall from salary and benefits. And then we have the purchase services, which had a slight decrease. We had somewhat of an increase on tuition costs for charter schools, and then a decrease in our 300s for professional services. So it was just about even with the 1920 school year. And then you move into the supplies and other areas. The key thing that I want to point out here is you're going to see that we have less than a percentage increase in comparison to the prior year. And that is including a $721,000 increase for a bond payment, which was offset by a $500,000 exclusion of a capital reserve transfer that I had previously referenced. So in doing so, the net increase on this area, and that includes supplies, property, services, other objects, and other financing, the 800s and 900s, which is where the bond payments are budgeted, was only a $135,000 increase to the budget in the current year, or for this proposed budget over the current year. So I'm going to circle back to a slide the same slide that we had presented earlier, and I walk through the Act 1 timeline. So the next steps are, after tonight, we're going to ask the board to move this proposed final budget to the May 12th board meeting to be approved. We'll also make the proposed final budget form on the PDE Form 2028 made available for public inspection. That'll be at 30 days, when it does not need to be done until 20 days prior to the adoption, but we will put it out far in advance. Not required by Act 1 would be a committee meeting discussion on May 26th, which we have the full intent of bringing back an additional update of anything that we've learned from the state or local funding or any other areas. And then we would move to June 3rd. We would post a notice of intent to adopt the final budget, which needs to be at least 10 days prior to the June 16th board adopting the final budget. And again, that final budget will absolutely be different than what we're presenting. And a great example of that is last year we presented a proposed final budget, just like we are tonight. That budget changed for final. And not only did it change, but on the night of the final adoption, we presented two different budgets with two different tax increases. So not only can you change it from now till then, you can absolutely make changes up until the night of presenting that final budget. The notice that will go out will just notify the public that we have the intent of adopting a budget on June 16th. June 16th, although adopting that night, it will be following a committee meeting. So there will be yet again another presentation on the budget where we will update the board and the public on all of the final assumptions that have been taken into consideration up to the night of the approval. And again, the last bullet here is just showing the absolute latest time to approve a budget under the Act 1 timeline is June 30th. The issue with that and why most school districts don't go up to that time is because if you approve on June 30th and you issue tax bills on July 1st, there is no way to approve a budget and the next day issue tax bills that would take into consideration the increase in that budget. So you typically go back to your most recently scheduled board meeting or committee meeting to that date to buy enough time from approving a budget and to issuing a tax bill. So at this time, are there any questions from the board?
Ms. Buford, before you start out, I'm just going to jump in and thank Mr. Rogers for the incredible work that he's doing and how detailed these slides were. It provides a lot of information, and you made it quite clear that the proposed final budget will look very different when we get to the final budget. You even called me today and gave me the late-breaking information from PASA today. So truly appreciate your dedication to this task and keeping us educated on all the things we have to consider in order to adopt a budget. I just want to say kudos to you and thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Rogers, for a really, really great presentation, really educational. I wondered if you could flip back to the slide. It's number 6. It says historical use of fund balance. A couple of questions. First, if you could explain, I suppose this is, that one, there we go. I suppose this is just, maybe this is standard language, use of fund balance, but I want to make clear, and I think you said this, but I want to sort of really be crystal clear, that this is not actually an amount we actually use. And I'm wondering, first of all, if there's any way, like, do we need to use this language? I was hoping that this slide could maybe, so again, it's maybe late for this, but that phrasing seems incorrect and potentially misleading to the public.
So I appreciate your comment, and I actually had a note on as I was sitting here giving the presentation, and this is to my fault. The header really should have read, first off, historical budgeted use of fund balance, to make that clear. And then above revenues and expenditures, it should have also stated budgeted, and I'll make those changes. And you are correct that it's not necessarily that we use the fund balance in those school years, but as this is a proposed final budget, we are trying to put out at this time, or in June when we approved these final budgets, where was the district and what they knew at the time of approving it? And this paints the picture of where were we and what decisions did the board make to balance a budget in each of those given years. Now, just like in anybody's personal life or business life, there are unknowns. And when you go from a budget to an actual, there are always variances. So in each of these years, there were always variances from your budgeted and your actual. So you are correct in stating this slide is absolutely budgeted numbers only. It is not actually what happened or the district actually realized throughout its financial statements and the operation of the school year.
Is there any way that we could get numbers of what was actually used? I think we actually even mentioned that our part of why our credit rating is good is because we haven't used our fund balance much. Is there any way you could add that information to show? And in particular, the reason I'm bringing this up is I don't want people to look at this and say, oh my gosh, even in these years that where we had a pretty good economy, they're spending these big dollars, right? What are they going to do? I want people to understand we actually have a reasonably healthy fund balance and that we have not used these amounts. Is there any way we could maybe even add a row that shows what actually was spent?
Yes, we have that information, but I also want to trigger a comment that you had made, that we have a reasonably healthy fund balance. We have $12 million in an unassigned fund balance in a $215 million budget. I don't believe that that's as healthy as surrounding districts in the county or our surrounding counties. It sounds like a lot of money at $12 million, but when you're comparing it to a $215 million budget, that can go quick. A 0% tax increase could eat that up in a year or two and be in a very, very dire situation. So I do appreciate the idea that we have $12 million in an unassigned fund balance, but to the comment of a healthy fund balance in our budget and being underfunded, Dan referenced $16 million. I know last year in the most recent numbers were $19 million underfunded from the state. You know, I don't believe that that's a healthy number. You know, we're doing the best we can with what we have and balancing the budget as best possible. But to your original question, absolutely, if you'd like to have those numbers, we can forward those out to the board and have them.
That would be great. I'd really appreciate that. And point totally taken. I definitely did not mean to overstate things. We definitely, healthy was probably too strong a word. I just want people to understand that these dollars that are listed in this bottom row here are not actually coming out of our fund balance each year. And that was the point I wanted to make. So I hear you completely. Healthy was the wrong word.
I just want to add too, Craig, that anytime you use fund balance, it means you're automatically balancing your budget using as a deficit. So the use of fund balance means right out of the gate that you're operating at a deficit. This year's budget, dipping into fund balance, which is your savings, those in the public, it's using our savings account. We're this year at a deficit. If you recall, a year ago, not this past year, but a year ago in November, I gave an update that our fund balance and fund balance that came back into the district, and the press covered it in a unique way. And a lot of the realization, Dr. Haig, that you're talking about, so if you go back to 2 years and we talk about the use of fund balance, the unknowns in this budget are staff turnover. So when we have a staff member who leaves at a high dollar amount in August after you've passed your budget, oftentimes the school district is bringing in a staff member at a lower salary, so that's a savings that's realized after the budget is passed. That will then go back into our fund balance because that wasn't a budgeted use at that time. So we do see, for example, of a $6.8 million use of a fund balance, there are times when some of the deficit spending comes back because we have staff turnover. And staffing and employees is usually where you have that, and then you have the cost related to special education. I just wanted to add that clarity to it.
So just to be clear, Mr. Rogers, you're going to just make a modification to Dr. Haig's point and make that one row that we are keeping here, like proposed or projected use of fund balance, just to make it clear, so that these are not actuals, correct?
Yes, we'll change it to budgeted. We'll use the word
budgeted
budgeted so that we can be abundantly clear that these are budgeted numbers that were actually approved. So each of these numbers up to the 2020, 2021 proposed are actual final budgeted board-approved numbers. And I'm strictly trying to keep it in conjunction with the budget presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Rogers. So my understanding is the fund balance is basically our rainy day fund, and I was wondering if there's any kind of guidance from PSBA or PDE as far as what is a reasonable size for a fund balance as a percent of budget.
So there's not necessarily a recommended, say, percentage. What they do is the opposite. They limit how much you can have in your unassigned as a percentage of your expenditures. So instead of saying having 5%, 6, 7, 8%, they say you can have no more than 8% of your expenditures, your budgeted expenditures, and that's how they limit those pieces. Now, just because we're talking about unassigned, you also have assigned, committed fund balances for various things. But in the unassigned fund balance, they don't propose a recommended amount, but they limit what you can have.
Okay, thank you very much. And I was speaking of unassigned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers and Dr. McGarry, for the very thorough presentation. I just want to rewind some bad memories. I'm sorry, Dr. McGarry. Back to the boardroom in 2011 and 2012 in the PAC Center. And I know that's a very bad memory for Dr. McGarry, but I do want to say that, you know, having been on the other side, the parent perspective, those years ago, I just want to reassure the public that Dr. McGarry always has the student's best interest at heart, that the things that you heard that would potentially need to be cut tonight are not things that the board then or the board now or the school leadership then or now would take lightly, would not be fighting for. But we need the community's help to fight to keep school funding at least at what it was last year from the state. As you heard during this presentation, we are $16 to $19 million underfunded every year. And that's your taxpayer dollars, your dollars. The dollars that are coming from this region are the dollars that are funding the state budget. The fact that we do not get that returned is simply not acceptable, and you should not stand for it. I know I saw the comments that are coming in that will be read later. I want to assure you that this board is fighting for you, but we need you to fight for us as well. The state legislature has chronically underfunded this school district, which has caused what you perceive to be very high taxes. We know that everyone is suffering and that the revenues are down from, you know, taxation and things like that. We appreciate that. But we have children to educate, children who have not been in their classrooms with their teachers for the normal amount of time since March, I think it was 14th. We cannot afford to not be prepared for when our students return to school, and we need your help. So I'm encouraging everyone that's listening to YouTube tonight or who will listen to this later to please sign up for PA Schools Work. They have a website. You can get on the mailing list. We need your help. We're not trying to be your adversary, and we know that everyone is concerned about their bottom line. I'm concerned as well. My husband, it took a severe pay cut during this COVID-19 experience. So we feel your pain. We know where you're at, but we also know where our kids are at. So please, we want to be a partner with you. So please join us by joining PA Schools Work. Thank you.
Ms. Buford, are there any other comments from the board?
time.
Thank you, Ms. Buford. Public comments. Are there any public comments at this time?
Our first comment is from Mr. Tony Ragoso, address 817 Vermont Road in Drexel Hill. The comment is as follows. School taxes in Upper Darby Township are among the highest in the state. It appears that the maximum tax allowable under state law will be levied on the citizens of Upper Darby this year. The Aeronamic school expansion is set to begin in August at a cost of nearly $30 million, an amount which does not include expected cost overruns. It is anticipated that a bond issue will underwrite the expansion. The debt created by the bond issue will be paid by school tax revenues. If not enough revenues generated, the bond will be in default. This will cause yet consistently large tax increases over many years. We are now in a deep recession, if not a depression, by all accounts. The coronavirus is expected to continue through the summer, with another expected peak in the autumn, according to the Center for Disease Control. Already in our township, there are a significant number of people out of work. Logic dictates that many people either can't or won't pay the local tax. Already, the owners of the Drexel Line Shopping Center have had the assessment on that property out by half. Who will make up the shortfall? The graphs presented in your meetings with the community outlining expected tax increases over a 30-year period must be completely disregarded in light of the state of the economy presently and for years to come. The Aeronamic School project will result in an added tax burden for Upper Darby residents. People who can, and this is sick, there's a word missing. People who can least afford, this is appropriate, People who can least afford to shoulder the tax burden, including retirees on limited fixed income, may have to choose between paying local taxes or paying bills to meet utility, mortgage, and other ordinary and necessary household expenses, including food. The Aeronamic school expansion should be delayed or at least scaled back to help lighten the burden of taxpayers in the district until such time as we are all in a position to pay the bill. End of comment.
Dr. McGarry, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I frequently interact with Mr. Ragoso via email, and I always appreciate his interest in the school district. And he sends a lot of information to the board and to us for us to consider. And I hope that tonight in the presentation, he is hearing, as the public is hearing, that we are reviewing the documents. We're taking those things into consideration. This is not meant to be anything other than the presentation that we presented tonight. It's not a negative comment, but the comment of school taxes in Upper Darby Township are among the highest in the state. That local taxes are a burden. I don't know that they're the highest in the state. I know that over the last couple of years, we've tried to keep our tax increase low and lower in the county. But Mr. Ragoso is correct that the taxpayers in Upper Darby pay a heavy burden to support their public schools. I also want to point out that it appears that the maximum tax allowable under the state law is levied on the citizens of Upper Darby this year. That is not true. And that might be just a misunderstanding in the communication and the public school jargon that is used. But early in November and December, the school board, rightfully so, took the stance to not go to the adjusted index of 3.8%, and they also said we're not going to go out and look for exemptions to go above the Act 1 adjusted index. And the school board came back to the administration and said, keep working hard, sharpening your pencils, and figure out what you can do, to the point we're now down to the base index of 2.6%. So we are not at the maximum tax allowable state opportunity here in the school district. As far as comments about paying this off over a period of time, hopefully tonight the presentation showed the board and the public that we're taking that into consideration, a 0% tax increase and the other concerns. And I know that Mr. Rogers also got information that he shared with us prior to today, that we were taking that in consideration from now until a final budget is adopted. Craig?
The only thing I'd like to add is, and I don't know that we pointed it out abundantly clear during the presentation, but going into this budget process pre-COVID-19, the goal or target tax rate that the district was looking to go for was a 3.5% increase. So to Dr. McGarry's point of sharpening our pencils, we've done our best to get it from 3.5 to a 2.6 without asking to cut or, stop projects or make major changes. So we have done everything thus far with what we have at our fingertips to draw back from a 3.5, which is what we were targeting, again, below the adjusted index at 3.8, and we are coming in tonight at 2.6.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for that response.
President Brown, I neglected to add for Mr. Ragoso's comment that was received today at 9:49 a.m.
Thank you.
The next comment is from Ms. Margaret Parenti. Her address is 932 Blythe Avenue in Drexel Hill. Her comment was received today at 11:31 a.m. It relates to the Finance and Operations Agenda, item number 1, Aeronamic Construction and Renovation Update. The comment is as follows. I don't know how you can possibly proceed with the Aeronamic expansion at this time. Surely the need of the people out of work, small business owners who may lose their livelihood, senior citizens on fixed incomes trying to make ends meet as prices on essentials climb, and many others who are going through very difficult times through no fault of their own are more important than bus loops, parking lots, and gyms. It is unfair and unconscionable to proceed at the expense of the taxpayer who are in dire need. In case you don't know, many people who are out of work have no incomes. They do not continue to receive a paycheck as you do. To continue with this project is a recipe for disaster for the residents and the school district. This pandemic will continue until a vaccine is available for widespread use. That means continued flare-ups, and in conjunction with flu season in the fall, could mean an additional lockdown. No one is even sure how schools will do if they reopen in the fall. I urge you to think about this and make the right level-headed decision. The health and needs of the residents must be first. Without a healthy economy, this project will put you in arrears and become an additional burden on the residents as we move forward. End of comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Buford. Next comment.
This comment is from Thomas J. Stapleton, address 4901 Marvine Avenue in Drexel Hill. This comment was received today at 5:18 p.m. via our email, and it is aligned to the Finance and Operations Agenda, item number 1, Aeronamic Construction and Renovation Update. So how come the water runoff from basically the entire side where I reside and 3 streets coming together, all the water drains down the driveway of 4911 through 4913 and dumps into the creek? This is a 24-inch pipe. Now with what will be new impervious surfaces, how can this drain handle this runoff? How come no one has talked to the homeowners there who still get water into their basements? How come there hasn't been a survey on what families would consider homeschooling and schoolology? I think he intended schoolology, their kids moving forward, due to virus, but more so due the hostile and unsafe environment for education. Look at your discipline report with the state, cause I am. What was the proper protocol for notifying the 91% of taxpaying homes who do not in caps, use the school district schools? Wonder why everyone feels blindsided and backstabbed. Thank you for your time. I am sure, and that's in caps and underlined, this will not be posted because of who I am. P.S. The Stapleton family will be moving after living here for almost 75 years if this expatiation goes through. I think he intended expansion.
Dr. McGarry, do you want to just?
Yeah, sure, and there's obviously experts that are still on the line. I also want to say to Mr. Stapleton, we'll make it a point practicing social distance. I'm going to reach out personally, meet with him one-on-one. Could do a better job, I think, explaining things to him and repairing the relationship, having been here for 75 years in his family. I know him well, and I think there's some repairing and relationships to do there to make things better, and I'll take responsibility for that and certainly set up a meeting and meet with him to talk about some of these concerns. Great family. Has lived here for a long time. I want to make sure that we don't have this happen and continue. As far as the water runoff is concerned, and Mr. Stapleton's question, we had extensive conversation earlier in the presentation from KCBA. It will be public. We've definitely had a back and forth with the township on improving off of Marvine Road. I know Mr. Stapleton lives right across the street from where the addition would be off of Marvine Road. But in that area, there will be an underwater water retention that will be filtered and then slowly released. And we actually increased the cost to make sure that the water runoff would be addressed. The township engineers, our engineers, and everybody made sure that we addressed those comments. That documentation was provided to the township, and I can certainly talk to Mr. Stapleton about that. We are definitely concerned about that as well. Anytime you have impervious surfaces, we don't want to have that additional issue in the community. As far as information on parents and using homeschooling, we've always had homeschooling in the school district. We've also always had students attending the Upper Darby School District virtual program that we've had for a number of years. So we do know, we have a pretty good handle on that. Not a bad idea. We can certainly send a survey out at some point in time when this all settles down about how we can improve and we can do better on Schoology. I don't agree with the idea that 91% of the community does not send their kids to the school district. But that, I think, is to make a point that there's concern with how things are going and how things are being handled. And again, I'll definitely have a conversation with him for that. As far as discipline is concerned, we don't hide from how we handle discipline here in the school district. We're not different than a lot of school districts, and we're doing our best. That's why we're putting in the programs we have here in the school district, such as trauma-informed care, restorative practices, and we're making sure that we handle the discipline that we can. The counter to that is on a state level and a federal level, the school district gets punished, if you will, for disciplining students, which is interesting. So the more we discipline and suspend students, we actually have money removed from our federal IDA funding to be used for other reasons. So we're addressing that and we're handling it, and I'm definitely going to set up a time to meet with Mr. Stapleton.
The next comment is from Ms. Dorothy Biter. She is located at 4409 Marvine Avenue in Drexel Hill. Her comment was received today at 7:02 p.m. Her comment is regarding Finance and Operations Agenda Item Number 1, the Aeronamic Construction and Renovation Update. The comment begins, what appropriate steps has this elected school board taken to ensure an independent estimate has been provided, all caps, outside of the selected architect's estimate? In addition, with the uncertain state of the economy today amid the COVID-19 pandemic, we expect proper communication of the increase to all taxpayer residents at a minimum in a sliding scale format, whether your house is valued at $100K, $200,000, $300,000, and beyond to pay for the investment. This is an integral part of your fiduciary duty, and it will be remembered by taxpayers who are the hardest hit by your decisions. Finally, is the 21st century design standard still being integrated despite Governor Wolf's freeze on Plan Con funding? Why? How does further impact the taxpayer exactly? Thank you for your considerations of the scope of this and all your selected projects.
I will turn this over to Mike Kelly, Frank Salerno, and Ryan Orr. One of them will jump on and comment first. They'll touch base on this, Mr. Brown, and I think KCBA, the architects that are still on the line, also want to touch back to provide also an update to Mr. Stapleton on stormwater, but we'll let them handle that. I apologize. I should have let the KCBA address that as well. Go ahead, guys.
No problem. This is Mike Kelly, and Ryan is our project manager, can speak to the stormwater piece as well. Obviously, stormwater management, just like anything else in the project, is being reviewed, as Dr. McGarry had mentioned, by local and even state review agencies, as well as the engineers, Pannoni engineers, to make sure that all stormwater stays on site. And Ryan, do you want to talk about the two retention basins that are included in the project?
Yeah, sure. As Dr. McGarry mentioned, there is one underground basin underneath the practice field there at the lower half of the site. There's also one at the upper half of the site underneath the new parking lot. So all stormwater on the site will be funneled through those two infiltration basins, which will infiltrate into the site a little bit. And then, as Dr. McGarry alluded to, will also slowly release into the storm system. But they're designed to hold maximum amount of water before that is released. So that is part of the design, and the district did incur extra costs in order to put those in order to handle the stormwater management in that manner.
And I'll quickly talk about PlanCon funding. PlanCon funding was stopped back in 2015, I believe. It basically just took away the partial funding that the state provided for school construction projects. That doesn't mean you can't build things. We're building schools all over the place. It's just that the state is no longer providing some funding towards that. So as far as 21st century design, we're putting our expertise and ideas into what we think is best for school safety, as well as, we worked quite a bit with your group on curriculum needs to make sure that it's meeting your 21st century educational goals. But as far as PlanCon funding, unfortunately, there is none to be requested at this time. So as Mrs. Mitchell had said earlier, when you're writing your state representatives about underfunding education in general, and certainly your district, PlanCon funding is another one that we've been looking and hoping that the state would provide to help alleviate a lot of these projects just like this and any other future project the district may be considering.
Dr. McGarry and board, this is Frank Salerno, the Director of Elementary Ed. If I can comment on the part of the question specific to appropriate steps that the school board has taken to ensure an independent estimate, I just want to reassure the public that we have, in fact, the district has, in fact, secured a third-party cost estimator, and that was a part of the process in terms of the estimate. It was not KCBA's estimate, but it was actually a third-party estimate to specifically address that piece of the question.
Thank you, everyone, for that comprehensive answer. I appreciate you addressing every part of that question. It hit a lot of different parts. Ms. Buford, next comment, please.
The next comment is from Amy and Joe Sullivan. They are located at 5000 Moorvine Avenue in Drexel Hill. Their comment was received at 7:08 p.m. Their comment relates to the Finance and Operations Agenda Item Number 1, the Aeronamic Construction and Renovation Update. The comment begins, it appears that the maximum tax allowable under state law will be levied on the citizens of Upper Darby this year. The Aeronamic School project will result in an added tax burden for Upper Darby residents. A recession is not the time to spend $30 million or more on a school expansion. The Aeronamic school expansion should be delayed or at least scaled back to help lighten the burden of taxpayers in the district until such time as we are all in a position to pay the bill. There are other options to help with overcrowding besides adding on to Aeronamic school, which need to be a priority. End of comment.
I appreciate the Sullivans staying engaged. I know they live around the community. Mr. Salerno, I've met with them, and I appreciate their comments and their concerns. Again, I just want to reiterate, I'm sure by now, hopefully, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan understand that we're not reaching the maximum tax allowable under the state law. We're actually at the index, base index, and not even at the index that we had talked about as of November and December, and compliments to the board for putting that pressure on to try to come in well under that. I also want to talk about the comments about scaling back the project. And I know we've had this conversation over and over again, and I know in meetings with the Sullivans, they did understand that we're up against a lot of moving pieces. And I just want to comment to everybody again on this call publicly, even though we've said it before, and sometimes in difficult meetings it might not come across as clearly. So I want to be clear that we're 62 classrooms short. If we only did the slight renovation that Mr. Ragoso and Mrs. Sullivan have talked about in their comments of close to 8 classrooms, and we built a new elementary school, we would still be required to cut classrooms in half and either expand Hillcrest and expand Garrettford. I want to repeat that. A new elementary school, a smaller addition or renovation to Aeronamic, would then force the district to expand Hillcrest and expand Garrettford. We do not feel that it's financially sound to expand Hillcrest, that's already densely populated and has a high student enrollment, and expand Garrettford, which we're not even sure you can build onto that building, which is a small property and traffic is an issue over there, and they have a higher enrollment than Aeronamic. The reason why Aeronamic is being considered is, yes, we need a new elementary school, but we do believe that it provides us other relief to reduce class sizes and better balance the school district. It also it has the savings of not putting additions onto 2 other schools. And that's why that was considered in this process. We respect that. And if there is a financial reality that we're not there yet, that we have to consider scaling anything back, I believe we presented in this budget what that would look like to delay any project with a 0% tax increase and what that looks like.
I want to acknowledge a comment from Holly Clark, located at 505 Sampson Street in Upper Darby. This comment was related to the Education and Pupil Services Agenda, item number 3, and this comment was received after the close of that Pupil Services meeting agenda item. This comment in its entirety will be included in the record in its entirety, and it will be addressed via district communication or at the next board meeting. The next comment was received from Dorothy Beater at 4409 Moravine Avenue, Drexel Hill. This comment was received at 7:46 p.m. by email, and it is addressing the Finance and Operations Agenda, item number 1, the Aeronamic Construction and Renovation Update. The comment is as follows. How does the school board presentation of the cost estimate tonight compare to Act 34 Max Building Construction, page number 25 of 39, $10,317,648?
I will answer the question. Obviously, KCBA can jump in. But during the Act 34 hearing, and the requirement of the Act 34 hearing is that $10 million is for the expansion and the addition onto Aeronamic, not the totality of the project. And the Act 34 hearings are called Taj Mahal hearings to make sure that whatever costs we are that are additions or additional space onto a property have to stay within that dollar amount. The $10.3 million is essentially the addition onto Aeronamic, not the total cost of the project. Mike, I don't know if I captured that well enough for you, but you can certainly comment back. Mike Kelly from KCBA.
Yeah, no, that was good. The maximum expenditure is focusing on the addition of the project, not the renovation.
Dr. McGarry, it's Frank Salerno again. Can I just add to that if you don't mind? I think it's important to note that we are actually below the $10 million mark. So it's an important point here to note that the question points out the $10,317,648 from page 25 of 39. We are actually projected to come in below the $10 million mark. So as you and Mike mentioned, that is specific to the addition only, and that number is actually lower than what was provided at the Act 34 meeting.
Thank you, Mike, Frank, and Dr. McGarry for that answer. Ms. Buford, next comment, please.
The next comment is from Mr. Anthony Rugoso, address 817 Burmont Road in Drexel Hill. Comment received today at 7:46 p.m. Mr. Rugoso does not indicate which agenda item he is referencing. From the content, we presume it is number 1, construction and renovation update on Aeronamic Elementary School. The comment is as follows. What is Moody's, he writes Moody's, but I think he believes Moody's rating for Upper Darby School District? End of comment.
I think Mr. Rugoso is pointing towards the bond presentation, agenda item number 2. The answer to the question is Upper Darby School District bond rating as of the bond issuance of 2019, the most recent rating, was A1 stable. And actually, just to read an excerpt out of the rating, because that was a change from the 2018 rating, it was an improvement upon the 2018 rating, and they had put a statement in there that the district's debt burden is notably below that of similar rated entities, as is expected to remain manageable despite forthcoming plans to issue new debt. It also states that material draws on reserves in your budget or actual proceedings would lead to a downgrade, which is to reference Dr. McGarry's point earlier, but it also speaks to how Zach from PFM answered the question about where we are as far as how much debt do we have and issuing debt in the future. The rating points to the idea of how low our debt is in comparison to comparable school districts, and that we have more than enough capacity to take on that debt, especially in future years.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for having that handy and ready to go. I'm impressed. Thank you.
The next comment is from Mr. Anthony Ragoso, located at 817 Vermont Road. This comment was received today at 8:00 p.m. Again, the agenda item was not included, but presumed to be about the Aeronamic construction and renovation update. The comment is along the same lines as his first comment about the sliding scale and higher assessments. Should I read that comment again?
Is it consistent with the first comment that, okay, then we're, next comment, please.
The next comment is from Amy and Joe Sullivan, located at 5000 Moravine Road in Drexel Hill. This comment was received at 8:05 p.m. Again, the agenda item was not mentioned. However, we are presuming that it is about the Aeronamic construction and renovation update from the content. Excuse me. The comment is as follows. Although the increase in taxes does not sound high, keep in mind taxpayers have a township, trash, and sewage, county and federal taxes as well, all of which are increasing while people are getting laid off and salaries freezing or decreasing. So the impact is still substantial. While the school district is wise to take advantage of low interest rates, the money would be better spent on a school in the 69th Street area, since those students will still be bused out of their neighborhood indefinitely under the current plan, since there is no current plan to provide them with a school. This plan is not solving overcrowding for those who need it until phase 2 or 3. As we see now, the future is uncertain, and those with the most need should be the priority. Continuing, does the Aeronamic expansion budget take into account additional salaries and pensions of increased needed staff, such as maintenance, gym attendants, or other staff? End of comment.
Dr. McGarry, we're well aware we can't build on 69th Street, so, but you can add anything you want to the rest of the comment, please.
Yeah, sure. I attempted to answer anticipation of Mrs. Sullivan's question about the pensions in the budget, so I think we addressed that with a 2.6% increase. So I'll work my way up from the bottom to the top. I also feel like a couple questions ago I tried to address the question, and I tried to address that in meetings with Mrs. Sullivan as well. 62 classrooms short, and we are attempting to address the need, not only where the need is in that community, but we still, even with a new elementary school, it will not be big enough to service just that community. So even with a new elementary school, we're going to have to redistrict, because while Charles Kelly and Senko are bused outside of their community, Highland Park is still overcrowded. So when those students come back to their communities and they're redistributed and the catchment areas, the boundaries change, we'll still need considerable classrooms, over 30 classrooms beyond the new elementary school. That's why we were considering the expansion of Aeronamic, so that we don't overcrowd Hillcrest and have to do additions onto Hillcrest, renovate Aeronamic, and renovate Garriford and put additions there. So we are taking that in consideration. I don't want it lost on everyone, and I know that there's, going round and round about this, and I guess we'll have to come to some understanding at some point. It's obviously easier for us that do this every single day, and that is we're bringing Senko home, and then put them back into a newer school area once this happens. But the game plan is, let's get Senko back into the community, save the money on the lease, and use that toward these payments. That is the game plan, and that's why we're doing it this way. There is a long-term plan.
Dr. McGarry, would you mind if Ms. Frank Salerno, if I added to that, please?
Please do, Mr. Salerno.
I think it's important to note that the board and district administration provided an update at the May 28, 2019 committee meeting, where we highlighted the summary of the operational costs for Clifton Heights Middle School and the Aeronamic renovations and expansion. So during that presentation, I believe it was on slide 5 or 6, we did provide a chart which very clearly showed the operational costs. This was non-personnel, non-instructional costs. I think, like Dr. McGarry said, it's important to remind everyone that this first step in the process of expanding and renovating Aeronamic is going to close Senco in terms of leasing St. George, a lease that costs nearly $250,000. In addition to that, there are operational costs at St. George, janitorial costs of $51,000, utilities of $42,000. So we're looking at a total operational cost of Senco currently at about $353,000 compared to about $88,000 with the expansion of an existing building. So in terms of personnel, we are simply moving Senco Elementary School to a better educational space at the current kindergarten center building and moving the kindergarten center students and staff to a 21st century renovated state-of-the-art space at what is now currently Aeronamic with the current Aeronamic 1 to 5 students. So all of that was outlined in detail if people want to search the May 28, 2019 committee meeting. It's really outlined in great detail during that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Salerno. Thank you, Dr. McGarry, for that answer. Ms. Buford, next comment.
President Brown, we're going to back up to Mr. Anthony Ragoso's comment. After consideration, it is different. Mr. Ragoso is located at 817 Vermont Road. This comment was received at 8 o'clock. Agenda item not indicated, but seems to be about Aeronamic. Comment begins. The sliding scale presented does not show the impact on taxpayers with higher assessments and is therefore misleading. The entirety of the total impact should be known to the citizens who are being asked to underwrite the Aeronamic School project. End of comment.
The sliding scale, I think it's actually in regards to the millage study requirement that's presented in the bond presentation, showing that it only shows the median assessment. The reason for that is, as the document stands, it's very hard to read in a presentation manner as we've put it forth, especially in a virtual setting. If you look to our budget presentations, we have typically presented a sliding scale that you're referencing. I know there's another comment that it only went up to $300,000. We can go out further to a higher assessment amount and show the impact, and we could also adjust the millage requirement study so that it shows beyond in a similar fashion of 75, 100, 150, so on and so forth. I don't recommend presenting it in the sense that it's going to be very hard to read. If I can find a way to shorten that down into a easier way to read it, we could bring that forth in a future meeting or make it public under this meeting in board docs.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Our final comment is from Annette Fenning, located at 5015 Marvine Avenue, Drexel Hill. Her comment was received today at 8:42 p.m. Again, agenda item not indicated. Content seems to be about Aeronamic Elementary School's renovation. Comment begins. Here is a statistical report from our Bright Mills, which shows sales for the past year. My calculations are that these would bring an approximate assessment of approximately $86,579 on the average price. But truth is that you can no longer use this method to predict tax assessments. Tax assessments are entirely different and based on sale price. How does your plan realign to plan for these assessments? Also, higher assessments due to tax increases have a direct impact on property values and result on downward trends. Tax assessments are unknown moving forward due to reassessment. The word unknowns is the word of the evening for your budget process. Are you willing to gamble? The tax reassessment and COVID-19 together will create an entirely different and unknown scenario. Why not wait and assess the results this year before approving major improvement projects? Loss of wages, restaurants and businesses are closing. Township ordinances putting pressure on homeowners and creating expenses will all come together and result in home loss and tax revenue loss that we cannot plan for because we don't know. At the end of the comment, there is an attachment of an image. The image is entitled Market Statistics, Monthly Statistics for the Date Range Selected. and there's an inventory comparison for real estate located therein.
Mr. Rogers, you want to address this question?
Sure. So I think there's a couple comments to be addressed here. First and foremost, the idea of coupling the tax reassessment and COVID-19 together when addressing our current proposed final budget. Let's be clear, the reassessment, and I stated this previously in the presentation for the budget, the reassessment does not go into effect until the 2021-2022 school year. That is 2 budget years. It's an additional year from now, a full school year away. And that will absolutely be taken into consideration. But what is most important right now as far as the reassessment is however this budget plays out and however our base revenue plays out next year will impact the following year because it will set our base revenue, which is most important because then you back into a new millage rate based on the new assessment rates. So we're not here to predict where the assessments are going, how much they are, and they are absolutely going to increase because we're going from an idea of using a common level ratio to decrease from a sales price or an assessment down to what the taxable assessment is, which to Ms. Fenning's attachment from the Bright MLS showing a average sales price of $154,000 over the past year. It looks like it's March 2019 through March 2020. That number, she then converted to $86,000 of an assessment using the common level ratio. So although I believe she's trying to point at us using $75,000 as a median assessment, let's be clear, you're looking at it 1 year's worth of sales. So over the past year, that means based on where we're looking at total district-wide assessments, every property, whether it's sold or not, where it's listed as an assessment currently within the county. We're showing, or based on Ms. Fenning's information, that we're actually selling homes above the average assessment, but that's the only takeaway I can take from that in conjunction with we're presenting all homes, whereas she's presenting a year's worth of sales that averaged at a price point of $154,000 or $86,000 of an assessment, and that is only 16,000 units over that course of time. So, and I can't speak to the individual units, but I think that's where the difference would come in from an outsider's perspective, seeing $86,000, and I appreciate the information and research that she put into this comment, but that's where we are with $75,000 considering a full school district. That includes Clifton, Millbourne, and Upper Darby Township. So all of our taxing authority. And I believe I answered. The other point here is, and it's well taken, indicating the lost wages, restaurants, businesses closing, different ordinances putting pressure on homeowners. Let's be clear, and again, this is a proposed final budget. This is not the final budget. All of those different items have been in consideration and will continue to be taken into consideration as we move forward. So we truly appreciate your comments and concerns, and we will take them into consideration as we move forward with our final budget.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Buford, if I'm not mistaken, you said that was the last comment, correct?
Correct. That concludes our comments for the evening.
Thank you very much for facilitating that entire process. Mr. Rogers, will you please review the agenda items presented this evening?
The first agenda item was the Aeronamic construction and renovation update, which will require board action. District administration and KCBA provided an update on where we stand with the Aeronamic school construction and renovation and are seeking the approval for us to move forward with the bidding process at the May 12th board meeting. So to be clear, we would be asking the board to move forward a resolution at the May 12th board meeting, which would then be voted on whether we go to bid or not on the Aeronamic construction and renovation project.
Thank you. So do we want to move this forward? Please signify this. We're talking about just the Aeronamic construction and renovation update. You can signify by saying I agree to move this forward.
I agree.
I
I
agree.
agree.
I agree to move this forward.
I agree to move this forward.
I agree as well. Anyone not agree? I just want to make sure. I think I heard every voice.
I agree as well.
Thank you very much. The next item.
The next item was the bond issuance. Similar to the previous item, this requires board action. District Administration and PFM provided an update regarding the 2020 bond issuance, and we'll also be asking to move the max parameters resolution forward for the May 12th board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Do we agree to move this one forward? Please signify by saying I agree to move this bond issuance forward.
I agree.
I agree
to move the bond issuance forward.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I think I heard all the voices. Anyone not agree? Okay. Third.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a comment quickly, too. I know that there was another comment Mrs. Buford is pointing to me to make sure I get it on the record. Mr. Ragoso, at about 6:44, put in a comment, what is the additional cost for the district for a continuation of virtual schooling as compared to your normal school budget for the school year where children attend in person? I addressed that comment during the presentation, and we'll certainly make sure that was read into the record as well at the next meeting. But we did address that comment during the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry.
Agenda item number 3 was the district official website, web governance platform, and website accessibility tool contract for Blackboard. This was presented by Mr. Bob Valinsky and Mr. Aranda Buford. This is in conjunction with an extension to our Blackboard contract for an additional 3 years and will require board action.
Thank you. Do we want to move this one forward? Please signify by saying I agree.
I agree to move this forward.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree as well. And the last agenda item is the proposed final budget.
Finally, we have the 2020-2021 proposed final budget. We presented the budget, and which is in compliance with the Act 1 timeline. This will require board action again to move this forward to the May 12th board meeting for a vote.
Okay, once again, you concur with moving this forward. Please signify by saying I agree.
I agree. Agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree. I agree.
Thank you. I think I heard all voices. Anyone not agree? Okay. I think that concludes all items. A motion is in order for adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. Meeting adjourned. Please signify by saying aye for adjournment.
Aye.
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 Meeting.
Aye.